Good morning and welcome to another in the occasional series, Chip Chat. And with me this morning, or this evening for you, Sully, is Sully, once of One Man's Opinion and Gamecast, and now, more specifically, of yesterday's tech. And that's what we're here to talk about, in part at least, today. And what we are going to talk about is the Game Boy and the history of the Game Boy and the retro scene. So say hello, Sully, and we'll get to it.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me, Joe. And I promise I don't make a habit of jumping ships because just, I don't know, when you're like listing off like all the YouTube channels, I'm like, oh my God, it sounds like I'm just like jumping ship all the time. But I'm planning on sticking on this ship for a while.
It's not that bad really, because I mean you were doing One Guy's Opinion and Gamecast kind of overlapped a bit, and you just wanted to expand out and do something that was a bit bigger than your own channel. So
we know what YouTube's
like. It wasn't a bad thing. It was just trying to get various different irons in the fire, as it were. Your latest iron in the fire. Sorry, go on.
No, sorry. I'm just imagining myself just like skipping along, like hopping from ship to ship, like, what's going on over here, and then going to the next ship, But anyway, sorry, Joe. It is the YouTube scene, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to try on different things. I mean, you know that Grant and I were trying to get another project off the ground, and that hasn't really happened because Grant's work commitments and all the rest of it. So absolutely. You do have to have different irons in the fire.
Yeah.
But to the point, anyway, let's get to talking about the Game Boy and the retro scene, more specifically relating to your new project. And tell me a little bit about what it is you've started and why you started it and how you got there.
It's funnily enough, it actually happened like very organically. Like nothing was very forced whatsoever. Whereas like in contrast to coming onto YouTube and starting some YouTube channels and doing some projects there, like a lot of it is like very orchestrated, very labor intensive, with the idea of having a payoff at the end, right? Like it's going to either come to some kind of like community that builds or, whatever your goal is. Whereas like the Game Boy stuff for me, I mean, it's probably 2 years ago now, actually. I've always been somebody that likes getting hands-on with stuff. And you could relate to this, Joe, because we were talking about PCs earlier. I mean, I'm not really that savvy when it comes to the technical aspects of stuff. I just love pulling things apart, seeing how they tick, and just taking a gander. So for me, it all started, I think it was in 2018, when we ended up at my partner's mother's house, and she was just kind of taking us through her spare room. She's kind of a hoarder, but for kind of cool stuff. So she had like heaps of stuff from like the 80s and 90s from when my partner's brothers were all a bit older and growing up at that point in time. And we're just tinkering through like all these VHS tapes. And I just found a Game Boy, like the original grey DMG Game Boy, the dot matrix Game Boy. And I had never actually owned one. So in terms of like the original one, I had a Game Boy Color growing up, which then led into, the Game Boy Advance, and I had the N64, but the original Game Boy actually beat me by a few years. So it all started with the DMG, and I've always been into like keeping things clean, tidy, organized, and I think that kind of weird tick transferred into the retro scene. I started restoring like a lot of these old handhelds. And it all started with that DMG. It had like the typical screen, had like some dead pixels and stuff, which then I researched how to fix that. And, I basically did like a whole restoration, and it could be on my Instagram. I'm not actually sure, but if anyone's listening and they want to go have a look, that is probably one of the first posts, like the whole before and after restoration of this Game Boy. And from that point in time, all of a sudden, I think I caught the bug for at least restoring like retro systems.
Started down the rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah, and it was slowly, right? And I didn't realize how much I'd been pulled in, and it happened quick. Once it kind of really got me, but all of a sudden I was on eBay trying to find like broken Game Boys and stuff. I just wanted to like pick them up cheap just to play with, just to see what I could do. Is it even possible to restore these? I was kind of looking for a bargain, but at the same time, I wanted to just hopefully restore it as well.
I remember early on you saying, I've just picked up some Game Boys from Japan or whatever.
Yeah, I think I actually posted a red pocket in your Discord, which was like the second one that I did. And, it was basic stuff. Like some of the screens would get what's called burn-in, which is basically sun damage where the polarizer film kind of bakes onto the LCD screen. So you got to replace that film. And then it's basically just a general clean. You might want to reflow some of the solder joints in there and clean some of the headphone jacks, all that kind of stuff. But at that point in time, it was all very basic restoration, before and after picture type stuff. And then all of a sudden, Instagram happened because I kind of realized I was spamming your Discord server with Game Boy pictures. And I thought,
feel free, I don't mind.
I thought I'd better find a place to kind of host the stuff that I was proud of, I guess. I was proud of these restorations. So I just kind of started putting it on my personal Instagram. And then Kelsey, my partner, was like, you should really just kind of give these Game Boys their dedicated space. And I think that's when Yesterday's Tech was born, just off the top of our head. And by some miracle, the name was available. And we're still we thank the retro gods to this day that name is still available. But yeah, so it just...
Yeah, that's amazing, because you'd think it wouldn't be.
I know. We went through so many iterations and, of different names that we liked. And how you take the E and you turn it into a 3 or something stupid like that. And yeah, Yesterday's Tech was just there. So we're like, all right, that's ours.
You started Yesterday's Tech very much in the same way that I went to university. So I was like, I'll do some A-levels. And my sister said, you should apply to university. I was like, oh, yeah, all right, I'll try that. And then I got, oh, you're in. Oh,
yeah.
Okay, I better go then.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was like. It was I just started, I think the first batch of Game Boys I bought just four Game Boy Pockets, the Game Boy Color. And it was all just restorations. It all went onto their Instagram. And, I just started garnering a little bit of attention, nothing extreme, just kind of a normal, appropriate amount of attention for a small Instagram page. And then I found everything else that was happening in the retro scene, which freaking blew my mind. I realized that the game was not about restorations. It was about bringing the hardware forward with new, kind of modifications and stuff. So it went from restoring these units to my interest went into actually modifying these units. And most popular with the Game Boys would be replacing the original LCD for something like a backlit IPS LCD. So for those of you that aren't too tech savvy, it is literally day and night difference. And I mean that literally, because the original screens had no backlight or front light. They had nothing. You were reliant on whatever your ambient lighting was to light up the LCD panel. So, the popular mods were let's get new LCDs in, let's do rechargeable battery mods. And yeah, at that point in time, my whole mind the universe opened up to the whole retro scene. And it wasn't just modifications, it was custom artwork happening, which Joe, we obviously started doing ourselves as well, because Kelsey's by trade an artist, both digitally and physically.
Some of it's beautiful, I have to say.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll definitely tell her that. But yeah, so it's the rabbit hole at that point in time kind of went from one rabbit hole to just 10 other whole rabbit holes. And I think we spent we spent a long period of time just kind of dabbling in a lot of stuff, throwing stuff at the wall. And, we with no intention of turning this into a business either. We were just doing it because I had really started enjoying it. Kelsey kind of started noticing I was really getting into this Game Boy stuff, and she was like, hey, I might try and do some artwork on a shell. And then from that point on, kind of the page started picking up a bit of interest, which was kind of really surprising to us. Like I said,
it's not surprising to me, because I look at what you were doing, and I look at the stuff you kept posting, and it was fascinating to me. And I think anyone who's interested at all in retro, and certainly if you're interested in the Game Boy, it was like candy. It was like, oh, God, yeah. Oh, look at this.
I wish it was as satisfying as candy. I'll tell you what, some of those things really had us kicking our head in. We've had a few.
I come from I come from a model making background,
Yeah.
so I can understand a bit about
When you break
some of the
something-
troubles you might have encountered.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, paint can be very unforgiving. But I mean, luckily for us, it was all just a hobby at that point in time. And, you know, what interest we did have, and we did have some people ask, like, hey, can we buy this stuff? And blah, blah, blah. At a very small point in time, which we no longer have, we did have, like, an eBay store. And we did sell, actually, a few of the painted units and blah, blah, blah. But that was all just with the goal of, all right, let's just try to sell some of the stuff we've made so that we can kind of keep fueling the hobby.
Yeah.
And that's all it was. Like, that was pretty much all of 2019. And it wasn't until probably 2020 that kind of things started to get a little bit more serious. So, but even though, you know, 2020 we started kind of flicking over from a hobbyist perspective into more of a holy cow, like, there's a lot happening in the scene that we could potentially monetize because we are seemingly doing a lot right in a lot of these kind of areas that are popular within the scene. You know, it wasn't until then that we kind of started really kind of going, okay, where do we want to go with all of this? You know, in terms of the artwork, the modification, which led up into this point in time where, to skip forward, Joe, because the journey kind of, it's just so much has happened. I don't want to lose everyone in the nitty gritty details, but, you know, fast forward to now, we've kind of settled in the custom artwork space, and we've gone from physically drawing on all these Gameboys and stuff to actually UV printing shells.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw you were talking about that.
Yeah, some of it is really incredible when done right. So we're in the process now of working with people to try and get what we're looking for as far as the UV printed quality goes. And the prospects there are very interesting because the issue with... stop me if I'm going into too much detail, Joe, but... No,
I'm interested in the detail.
Yeah. Because I can go on so many tangents, so just keep me on the track if I'm going off. But the issue with a lot of the physical artwork and stuff is... One, you have a durability concern because you're putting artwork on a handheld. Handhelds get dropped. They're being handled, so stuff can wear. Two, the time and labor that goes into it. Don't get me wrong. We really enjoyed painting and drawing and clear coating these Gameboys to these crazy mirror glass-like finishes. But when you kind of flick over from a hobbyist perspective into like more of a, we want to monetize this and build a business, the amount of time that was going into these units and then the amount of money we'd then have to charge for these units, wasn't very sustainable.
Yeah, I can understand
because
that, yeah.
we were going from like 500 AUD for like the full modded Gameboy with the art, which blows my mind. People were actually lining up for it, which is insane. So, like,
it's custom hand drawn artwork, isn't it?
It's just unreal.
I mean, my brother-in-law was doing stuff like this. He was making little miniature guitars and some of them, you know, like unique guitars that an individual artist had played or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And these were one-off custom designs.
Yeah.
And you can charge a lot more for something like that.
Yeah.
There's plenty of miniature guitars on the market, but they're mass they're mass produced, and it's different when you're buying a single one-off. You know, there's a
people put their own value on
collectors
something.
love stuff like that, you know?
Like, because we'd get people coming to us with their idea, and like they're like, "Can you do this?" And we're like, "Well, yeah, we can. It will be kind of expensive though, just because like the turnaround time on these systems, we're talking like months. It was a long time. You know, any setbacks, you know, there's a few like setbacks all the time. So it's a really like you're really working and fashioning the final product as you go. But when people come to you with something that they want, that's their idea, they seemingly are pretty loose with, you know, how much they're prepared to like really put up for something that they really want. But yeah, so anyway, long story short, we stepped away from all of the physical stuff just because the time and all that kind of stuff wasn't sustainable. And, we went down through huge rabbit holes with like airbrushes and clear coats and all this kind of refining in that space to try and get to a certain point. But, at the end of the day, we discovered the UV printing technology. So the UV printing stuff will be a staple for us, or at least we're hoping, because we're kind of still in the development process of that, but we want that to be a staple for us. Like that's where we started.
So Kelsey will still design.
Yes, absolutely.
Will still do the designs.
And I will give you some pictures as well, Joe. And if anyone's listening, just go surf the Instagram page, Yesterday's Tech, because we've got a lot of our mock-ups on there now. She just did like a Star Fox one. She's done Zelda, Pokemon, like full mock-up stuff that's ready to be printed. And we have actually had some printed. So the idea of Yesterday's Tech is to kind of still maintain that very niche custom element to the business and the brand. We don't want to be like kind of this business that's just doing the same stuff where, we're just reselling parts or anything like that. We want to keep working on the stuff that is the original reason why we got into it in the first place, but it's just about refining all that to a point where, it is kind of a bit more, has a bit more flow to it, which is why we're UV printing. So that's going to be a staple. And then obviously my stuff personally is, I guess parts production. Like it's been an insane journey. Like I've gone down so many rabbit holes, and like I'm into all of the molding and casting stuff now. So I physically make the aftermarket parts. And the whole idea of that is to be doing something that's a little bit different. That's our own, like the polished parts. A lot of the parts that I'm doing are like polished straight out of the mold. So everything we do, we want to have our own little exotic twist on it. So that's...
I've seen your sprinkles one, the Gameboy color sprinkles.
Those have been weirdly popular too, Joe. So yeah, I don't know.
No, I can believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like, we're working on a lot. And to be honest, like a lot of the journey has been, we started organically and we've started doing stuff that we liked, and we're still doing a lot of that stuff now, but we've just been throwing a lot of stuff at the wall, trying to refine it and boil it down to something that we know is going to work, which we are there now. Like probably towards the end of last year, we knew where we wanted to go, and then we built towards opening the store based on those kind of foundations. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey. It's definitely kept us busy. There's been a lot of stuff tossed at the wall. So a lot.
You were saying to me beforehand, you feel like you've become a bit of a workaholic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, like I still work the day job, so the day job has financed basically becoming a sole trader and starting a business. So it's honestly, I don't know how to. It's kind of surreal in a lot of ways. Like don't get me wrong, we're not like rolling in money or anything, but when you go from like a hobby that is just something that you're just doing on the side because it's just an interest, and then all of a sudden you're having meetings with insurers and accountants for your business, like that's insane in the space of like 18 months to 2 years. It's kind of surreal.
Yeah, and you're looking around going, how did we get here?
Yeah, it really is like
this
that.
This is not what...
It really is like that.
And this is the thing you have to be careful of as well, isn't it? Because obviously you got into this because it's a hobby, and you have to get that balance right where you don't lose the reason. One of the reasons for people start these things is because they enjoy it.
Yeah,
and I know you enjoy it. I've talked to you about it loads of times, and I know that you love doing this. And you have to keep that balance. You don't want to get more and more into the business side of it and lose sight of what it was that you got into it for in the first place. It still has to be fun. I mean, there's an old saying, isn't there? Something along the lines of show me somebody who enjoys their work and I'll show you someone who's never worked a day in their life.
Yeah.
So, I could see why you would want to start something like this as a hobby, but I can also see why you want to take this into being more of a business. And yeah, I mean, I'm as I said to you before, I think it was last night when I sent you a message and I said, I'm really excited to see where this goes. And on that note, actually, where do you see it going? Sort of where you are in a year's time, maybe 3 years, 5 years?
Well,
how do you see this expanding?
I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people within this scene that have actually managed to start a business around it is you're at the mercy of, I guess, the scene itself. You know, I kind of think of the retro space and definitely like the original Game Boy space as being like this inflating bubble that will eventually pop. At the moment, and I'll bring you up a little bit up to speed on some of the economics. A Game Boy, when I first started doing this a couple of years ago, you could pick them up cheap. Like, they were pretty cheap. And I think I actually entered the scene right at the time when a lot of it really started picking up and exploding. Like, I can't speak for every system and the retro scene in general, but at least the Game Boy Color and the DMG, it started to go gangbusters. So I kind of view, like, at least the early Nintendo stuff as something that could potentially pop and come back down to earth. So I think you need to be, when I think about our business going forward, Kelsey, our business being Kelsey, the other half of Yesterday's Tech, when I think about it, the number one thing I have in mind is continue to be organic with the growth. Don't get too set in concrete where you want to go, and be flexible. I'm not thinking about Game Boys in 5 years. It's just I'm not even thinking about it whatsoever. Like, in fact, I'm thinking I'm probably going to be doing other systems, different generations. What I do want to
diversifying, really.
Absolutely. As the time comes. Because, you know, like, I would like to grow this business in the next probably 1 to 2, 3 years to a point where I am dabbling in a lot of different systems at once, but staying flexible, rolling with where the interest is going with the scene, and just going with the flow, essentially. Because I don't think this is like a business where you can get set in concrete with the products you're offering. Because you're at the mercy of the flavor of what's happening at the time. So yeah, it's hard to plan too far in advance. But like that's why we put in place like kind of why we started doing it and what our interests are. And that, for me personally, it is about the molding and the casting and the part production, and then putting my own exotic twist on these parts. And Kelsey's is the custom artwork. So that's never going to change. But the flavor and the popularity of certain systems and different generations will change. And the one thing that kind of gives me hope that I think the business can continue to be successful long into the future is that the video game industry in itself is still going very strong and continuing to go stronger and stronger and stronger. And the biggest generator of nostalgia, being Nintendo, is still kicking ass today. So we've got a lot of systems in front of us before we run out of like systems to kind of
Absolutely.
Have a retro scene surrounding, you know?
So, I mean, would you look at doing, would you look at doing other, say, handhelds by other companies outside of Nintendo as well, though? Would you look at that? Or
absolutely. I mean, we can touch on kind of like where I think the scene might be going in some directions. Like, I think the Wonder Swan, I can never get that to roll off the tongue correctly. It was a handheld exclusive to Japan. It came in like a non-color and a color variant, kind of around the time of the Game Boy Color and all that, in the early to mid 90s. It might have actually been later 90s. But I actually think that could be one that's going to be red hot soon, because I've seen a lot of the really big influencers picking them up. I picked them up as well. So I think we could be seeing a little bit of a trend shift into that system, which is not one that's really been covered much at all. Other systems, though, at the moment, like the Sega Game Gear, have been pretty popular and hot within the scene as well, alongside the Game Boy. And you can kind of measure this stuff.
Yeah, I've seen a few people pick up the Game Gear recently and talk about it. Yeah, absolutely. And it's had almost as much love, like in terms of like the modding and all that kind of stuff too. Because when I say like the scene's kind of gotten into it, the scene is comprised of so many talented people that all bring something different to the table. You know, you have it's absolutely like gobsmacking, because you get the guys. Natalie here in Australia, who I talk to all the time, and other people, like, they're right into the hardware development. They're manufacturing new hardware to improve the original systems, whether it be something like a new
LCD, PCB board, which kind of drives the new LCD, like kind of bridges the communication and language issue between the original hardware and then the new LCD. Or Natalie's worked on like drop-in LED kits, battery mods, like audio mods. You know, you got that entire scene which is thriving and doing their own stuff with the hardware. And you got, you know, people manufacturing parts and, you know, more of the housings and the shells and the plastics and the buttons like myself. And then Kelsey and that whole other freaking art scene just creating all kinds of crazy art, which is getting put on physically, UV printed, decals. There's so many different elements of the scene that come together and give a system kind of the love and TLC I guess it needs at that point in time. So when a system takes off, you start seeing all these different parties come to the table and doing crazy stuff with the system, which is, it's pretty cool. It's actually pretty cool to see happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really does feel like this really interestingly connected, networked community of people. And the Game Gear, yeah, it's one that's been red hot, and you can kind of measure a lot of this stuff based on, one, who are your big influencers, who pick up, you know, the next different system, and then your actual part manufacturers as well. That, you know, they'll say, hey, we've built our own brand new Game Gear mold, and we've just basically injection molded 1,000 in China or something like that. And all of a sudden they're driving interest in a system because they've just made new housing. So everyone's like, holy cow, like look at these crazy new pastel pink Game Gear housings. And all of a sudden your kawaii girls have bought 100 pink shells, and they're all influencers. So they're tweeting about them and sharing them on their stories. And all of a sudden the scene's flicked over to Game Gears. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's almost like a kind of meme thing, isn't it? Or when you were a kid at school. I mean, I remember when, it's showing how old I am, I remember when I was a kid at school, for a while, yo-yos became very popular. Everyone had a yo-yo.
Yeah.
And then later on, skateboards, everybody had a skateboard.
That is exactly what it's like. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's the other thing, I mean, the thing that strikes me is it seems that what happens with the modding scene and what happens with the communities is they actually take these consoles that are quite old now, and they are now better by far than they ever were when they were first released, or even, you know, after they've been out a few years. Yeah. And so if you own a Game Boy now and you've got a modded Game Boy and you've got, you know, the enhanced screen and all the rest of it, and some of your mods, the custom artwork and stuff, you've got something that is far more luxurious, something that is far more, you know, enjoyable to own. It's a bit like when you go back and you buy like your collector's edition vinyl or whatever. It's there's something special about that, especially when you tap in the nostalgia. I mean, I know with records and things, if you're buying a collector's edition vinyl box set of I don't know, The Who live at Leeds or something, right? There's something about owning that and having that is better than just having the CD.
Yeah, the nostalgia is a big driving force of like a retro scene. You know, you're not going to have like, I honestly believe probably most of the people in the retro scene don't actually play retro games. Like, I think most of them are just trying to relive a certain moment. They like surrounding themselves with the product. It's like merchandise from a different time period. And like, I think when you're talking about like all the modifications and stuff and, you know, really modernizing the system, like it's kind of this weird interplay. Have you heard of the saying where it's not as good as you remember it, and nostalgia has kind of caused that issue? You kind of viewed something with rose-tinted goggles. Like, when you are
go back and play Deus Ex and you're...
Yeah, absolutely. When you take a Game Boy or something, or whatever your system is, and you do the mods to it to modernize it, right? It's not only the way you remember it, it's better. And you still have all of that nostalgia attached.
Yeah, and this, it's almost intangible, the having that thing in your hand. And you're right about we were talking about this before we started. I'm not really a handheld, player. I don't play handheld games very often. I'll play my Switch when I'm on holiday. I'll play, some of the Chinese. I've got several of the Chinese handhelds. I've got 2 PS Vitas, 3 Nintendo DSs, 2 lights, and one of the later whatever it was called, I can't remember, the 3DS. I've got a Pi Boy DMG, which is a Raspberry Pi inside a DMG case, modded thing. I've got all these things. I've very rarely play games on them.
Yeah, I know.
Other
I'm
than,
the same.
Sometimes when I'm waiting for my kid in the car or whatever. But it's just, there's something about, as you say, there's something about owning them. And this Pi Boy DMG is just grey. But if it had a custom, paint job on it, it'd be phenomenal. It'd be lovely.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? You can't quantify it.
Say again, sorry?
It's hard to quantify exactly what the driving force is behind it, because, you can get nostalgic about stuff just looking at things on the internet, but then to actually own it and go that next step forward and then also continue to keep doing it when you quite often don't play a lot of the games, you just like having it around. It's a hard thing to quantify why, it
is like, I'll go back to music again. I read something some years ago. They were saying that, in people's record collections, on average, people play an album like 4 times. It's probably lower now because people have got playlists and stuff. But you have a record collection. I've got hundreds of records, and you think about it. You think on average, you've played each of those records 4 times. So what that means is some of those albums you've played a lot.
Yeah,
but a lot of those albums you'll only have played, some of them maybe once, maybe twice.
Yeah.
And they've sat there, but you wouldn't get rid of them because they mean something to you. I used to say all my books tell a story about me. They're all part of my history. And I was loath to get rid of any of them. And I think it's the same sort of thing. I feel like this, I'm sitting in here and I'm surrounded by PC games, PlayStation games, Nintendo games, Xbox games, you name it. I've got games, and then I've got all the ROMs and stuff that are loaded up on handhelds and loaded up on my PC and stuff. How often do I play them? I play a couple every week, maybe. But you're not going to, just physically, you're not able to play all the stuff that you've got. You just can't. You haven't got the time.
No, I think but
it's just, it's like having a comfy old blanket or something.
It is. I don't think I know anyone that doesn't collect something to some degree. I think we all have a thing that kind of takes our interest and we stockpile a small collection of something. It just seems to be some kind of, if you're not working, there needs to be something else you're doing. And we live in a consumer capitalist world, so we're all kind of geared towards buying stuff and conditioned to buy stuff. And so then all of a sudden, I think, collecting is kind of something that interplays into it and we're all conditioned to do. We do it for, it's just what we do. We're humans. We like to collect and do stuff like that. And I guess we all have our different interests, and some people like collecting DVDs, some people like collecting cards, some people like collecting shells from the beach. But I think we all do it for the same reason.
I used to work with a woman who used to collect glasses.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah,
she used to have lots of different styles of glass. Every day she'd come in every day wearing a different pair of glasses.
Yeah.
She just loved glasses.
Yep.
It's like, I've got to wear them. I might as well have ones that I like.
Yeah, I watch a guy on YouTube who just scavenges metals and smelts them, and he collects the metals in bar form after he's smelted them. So, yeah, each to their own, I guess. Yeah.
Whatever floats your boat.
Yeah.
Bringing this back round to your thing, though. This is the the extension of that is kind of what you're doing, is taking it to the next level. And I can talk a bit about that in terms of, I mentioned model making earlier on, and I was not so much these days, I don't really get the time to do it anymore, but I used to be a very keen model maker. My brother-in-law worked as a pattern maker. He knows a lot of people who, well, some of them no longer with us, but he knew quite a lot of the people in the scene back then. And these were people who did that same thing. They came from a background of being maybe a model maker. Some of them were ex-military, so they loved that whole militaria thing.
Yep, that makes sense.
You know, one guy I knew through my brother-in-law who was an ex-guardsman, big guy, massive guy, ex-guardsman, talented artist in many respects, and he started a cottage industry. He started making kind of Napoleonic and different era military figures, and he would sculpt them in his garage. He had a workshop in his garage, and then he had out the back, he had like a shed with his smelting and all the rest of it, and he used to cast, and he actually had a business at home doing that. And like I say, he sculpted the figures in the garage, and then once he got the masters, he would actually cast them out in his back garden.
Yeah.
And he ran a business like that.
Yeah.
And it all came about from, like with you, that kind of organic growth of, I like doing this. What's the next step? What's the next? And it's kind of little incremental steps that take you down that, well, as we said before, down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But it's exciting, isn't it? I mean, I'm getting excited talking about it.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And, you know, like, just like me and with your mate, you're not even necessarily thinking about the rabbit hole or monetizing it or whatever. You're kind of thinking about, like, I enjoy this and I want to kind of keep pushing my own envelope and see how far I can take this for your own personal satisfaction, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think at any point, if you lose that, then that's probably the time to stop, because I also think if you lose that, that's when your products, if you're doing it and you're making products, if you lose interest and you're not interested anymore, and you know, and you're just doing it by the numbers. And I was talking to you about YouTube earlier on and how I got a little bit jaded with YouTube, and I didn't just want to put out any old crap. I just, you know, I don't want to just moan on about stuff just for the sake of it. I want to be actually passionate and interested. Once you lose that, I think it becomes obvious as well. I think that if you're just putting stuff out for the sake of it, then eventually your products will start to suffer, and then you'll actually lose custom.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting way to differentiate. I think at least what Kelsey and I do from, I think, just like general parts manufacturers and stuff like that, is that, you know, people that manufacture parts and resell parts and all that, it's easy for your job to just become customer service and mailing out product that's just you're buying or is coming out of like an injection molding machine. Like the human interaction with the craft is then removed, right?
Yeah.
But at least like kind of like what, like, don't get me wrong, like I do heaps of mundane tasks when it comes to like molding and casting. You know, you have to clean the molds, and you know, there's a lot of mundane stuff that is occurring there. But the other side of it is like mixing new colors and buttons and pushing the envelope with like your kind of resin formulas and you know, refining the kind of hobby in itself of like building molds and casting is like it's something that I'm not even sure you'll ever truly master. There's always something about every object that you're molding that is unique in its own right, that can present its own challenges. Like buttons are one thing.
I mean, this is very much like the model making scene in that sense.
Exactly.
You know, you know, a lot of the things you're doing and a lot of the techniques you're using are straight out of that side of things.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
I went with my brother-in-law. You did a lecture about casting and stuff like this, you know. So, yeah, and I mean, I do. I love it. I love what you're doing. I love the whole scene. I mean, I don't even own an original Game Boy, and yet, you know, you know what I was like every time you were posting. I was going, oh, this is fantastic. I love this.
Well, I mean, we're planning on we will this year. I won't put a date on it, but we will be this year at some point when we can scale up our equipment, because at the moment we're limited by space and equipment. A lot of the casting and production of parts is kind of equipment heavy. So we are going to be scaling all that up, but we are moving into a larger space soon, so we're kind of waiting on all that. So I'm not going to put any dates on anything, but we will be doing whole Game Boy shells, like straight out of mold. So I will send you a shell, Joe, and we'll send you a build.
Oh, nice one, man.
Yeah. So just whatever color you want. You can have pastel pink if that's your thing. You can have Joe Chip blue. We can make it glow in the dark. And we'll do the whole kit, which will be fun. Just like a fun build.
Oh, man, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. That would be fun.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Next question, though. I mean, you've already touched on this a bit. You said about moving into other scene, other handheld and stuff. I was wondering about things like the DS and stuff, because obviously once you start moving up the generations, it starts getting more complicated and more complex and stuff like that. Are you looking to move, like, maybe as the scene you said, I'm guessing what your answer will be here, that you'll be dictated to some extent by the scene and what people are into. But would you look at things like the DS or moving into even something like the PSP or the Vita down the line? Would you look at those at all?
Well, the the Vita is actually pretty popular at the moment, which is interesting because
I've noticed that actually.
It seems like across every brand, and like, let's get one thing straight. You've got the handheld scene and you've got the console scene. The console scene is not really my thing, but that is kind of running in its own directions and doing crazy stuff as well. So I just wanted to put that out there. Like, the retro scene is much more than the handheld stuff. But with each kind of brand of handheld, people at any given point in time will gravitate towards one or two from that brand. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be in the same time period. Like, at the moment, the PSP Vita and the Vita in general is freaking pretty red hot. People love doing, like, soft mods, that kind of stuff, like larger memory, emulators, and all that kind of stuff. There's not a lot happening in terms of, like, the visual customization or aftermarket parts. But the Vita is kind of really hot on its kind of hardware side mods. And, the Game Boy, obviously, it's all the original stuff at the moment. Pretty much majority from what I am looking at, which I think is pretty much all of it, is, your DMG, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and SP. The DS, 3DS, I don't know if it's in the retro space yet. It's kind of in that weird limbo time between kind of still new-ish, and I use that loosely, like, compared to, like, the DMG, it's freaking new, right? So the scene's not really, the retro modification and customization scene hasn't necessarily picked up on the 3DS and DS stuff yet. They do like the SP, but I think a lot of that started with they liked the SP because they were cannibalizing parts to put in the Game Boy Advance, because those systems are basically the same, right? And speaking of, I'm going on one quick tangent, Joe. Speaking of
that's fine.
Cannibalizing parts, and you touched on this with the Raspberry Pi stuff, that's very popular. People love doing, like, sleeper builds in the DMG and the pockets. So I highly recommend people here check out, oh God, I'm going to really miss someone out here, but Natalie the Nerd and Jamesy Plays and Xipher Designs with an X on that last one, because these guys have taken stuff like the DS PCB board, right? And this is the only way that I really think the DS has kind of been relevant. They've taken the DS PCB board and they've transferred those internals into stuff like the DMG and the Game Boy Pocket and Color, right? So they've retrofitted that hardware in there with a great deal of modification and even printing custom PCB parts. And for everyone out there, a PCB is just like the electronic board, right? Which is in these systems. And they've transferred those internals in, and they've created, like, sleeper builds. So, like, Joe, you know what a sleeper build is, right? Like a sleeper car or a sleeper PC. From the outside, it looks like a piece of junk or something, and it's packing some intense power. So they've taken these internals and they've built fully working systems inside the DMG and these other older systems, which I think it's freaking cool because it does what the original mod scene likes to do most, I think, which is modernize older systems. So yeah, I mean, we kind of push that envelope a lot because like kind of all of the original Eternals kind of came out and kind of newer ones went in, but it's kind of this really weird, cool middle ground where, you know, it looks like a DMG, it plays like a DMG, but it has all the benefits of a newer system, and it will even play like Game Boy Advance, SP, Color, DS games on the freaking, sorry, not the DS because there's too many control inputs, but it'll play pretty much everything up to like the SP on the DMG. Like,
which is
it's nuts. That's
which
bonkers.
Is mental,
yeah.
and just fun. I mean, again, it goes back to that thing of it's fun. And I said to you before we started, if I'd have paid a bit more of more attention when I was doing my my engineering qualification back at college when I was like 18, and I kept up and managed to have those kind of skills, I could see myself being in that, because it is a great crossover between kind of that, having those model making skills and then also having those electronic skills to be able to pull off something like that. Because I've looked at things and thought, I'd love to do that, but I haven't got the skill set to do it.
Yeah.
And so I admire people who do shit like that, because it's like, wow, look at that. That's so cool. I'm doing it again. You know, it excites me.
It's insane.
To be honest, it excites me more than the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox One, Series X or whatever, because it's, you know, it's getting your hands on and people getting down and dirty with stuff and seeing what can we do, what's possible.
And that's it. Like, it's the, you know, people always ask me, like, what's the point of like the mod scene? And the answer is there is no point. People do it because they want to do it. They have an interest in it. Like, they're just doing what they want to do. And that's the cool thing about it. Like, they have their own personal interest and need that they're trying to solve with whatever they're doing. And then other people get to benefit from it if it's cool, you know? And
it's like that. I don't know if you've seen it. There's a guy, the Sinden light gun.
No.
Have you seen this?
No, I haven't.
It's for like, you can use it on PC, you can use it on Raspberry Pi or whatever. And it's not sure if it's workable with the original hardware, but it's basically designed to use a light gun on modern TVs.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of solutions for doing this, but none of them have been particularly great.
Yeah.
But this guy basically sat down and started working out how to do it for himself.
Yep. He
wanted to make one for himself.
Yep.
And it's the same thing. He's turned it into a company now, and now he's selling them and stuff.
That's exactly it. They have their own need that they're doing it. Like, and speaking of like just kind of cool people, Joe, if you're okay with this, I probably have like a short list I can give you that you could probably put in the description box of just people that do different stuff in the scene that would kind of be cool for anyone interested in looking into some of this stuff that watch this episode.
Absolutely, yeah. That I definitely I was going to ask you for that anyway, because, you know, I mean, when you do a video like this one, the whole point is for people who are interested in it and, you know, going and finding out more stuff. And, you know, if you haven't got the skill set to do it yourself, you can find someone who can do it for you, or, you know.
A lot of the people in the scene are very transparent with what they're doing as well. So it's kind of cool if you want to come on and, you know, you're interested in a specific mod. A lot of the time they'll just let you know via like a private message, or I transparently do a lot of stuff just on my page. Most recently it was just like the recharging a recharge mod and the new LCD mod for a game that I just did. And the cool thing about the recharge mod was you're recharging just nickel metal hydrate AA's that you buy off the shelf at the supermarket inside your Game Boy. Like, that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, I've gone off on a huge tangent, and you were asking me about me moving forward with the SP and DSs, were you? Yeah,
I mean, I'm just interested to, you know, to expand upon what you said earlier about going with the scene and seeing, you know, what other consoles. And you've already said you're not particularly interested in the home consoles, and just touching on that as an aside, talking about people who start. I actually bought a wireless adapter for the original Xbox, and you can. I was playing an Elite X. I make videos about this. I was playing an Elite Xbox controller on the original Xbox.
Yeah, that's really cool. I remember that. That was really cool.
And it's just some guy in Canada, and I contacted him over Facebook, and because I was looking to make one myself, and I thought, well, I could probably do it myself, but it's going to take a while. Mm-hmm. So I ended up buying it off this guy.
Yeah, that's cool. That's very cool. And Modded Vintage Gamer actually had one recently where he had, I think it was like all of the Xboxes system linked playing, God, what's that original flying, the World War II like flying game? Panzer Dragoon or something like that. Anyway, it was cool because all of the hardware was system linked and all of these consoles were in the same multiplayer match with each other. Like, isn't that just insane?
That is, remember? I saw this video, and that is stuff like that's just awesome. Like, and that's when, I mean, we're getting off on a tangent again here, but this is one area where I think Microsoft are really, I love that sort of stuff with Microsoft. The fact they're keeping all the generations working with one another and so on and so forth. And okay, I know sometimes you have to tweak things a bit, but it's just brilliant. And the whole idea of keeping, I've talked to you about this before, and okay, again, we're going off on a tangent, but the whole modding scene for me, part of it is we're keeping these games alive. Okay, we may not play them all the time, but we want to have access to them.
Yeah.
Even from just a historical perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
And let's be honest, gaming is an art form. I know some people say it's not, but gaming is an art form. It's just as much an art form as films or TV or books or paintings or whatever. And we've seen with TV, we've seen with movies, we've seen with radio that things get lost. Yep. And then people in the future look back and they go, oh, God, I wish we still had this stuff.
Yeah, things actually
get completely lost. And so the modding scene for me is keeping this stuff alive. It's more than keeping it alive. You said yourself, it's making it better.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I actually am interested in like a lot of the home console stuff. Part of the issue there is like, one, how much time I have, because I already started down this whole other journey of the handheld scene, right? It's what I know. But also the size of like a lot of the home console stuff. Like when you're talking about like casting and molding whole system shells or something like that, like that's a big job. Like think about like the size of a Gameboy shell compared to like an original Xbox.
Oh God.
Yeah, like that's. I'm thinking about the pressure pot that I'd need, because like every mold that you inject into, right, it goes into a pressure pot. You put it under pressure, because if you got any trapped air in there or whatever, like any air in your mix, the pressure crushes that air down to such a insignificant size that it's not visible to the human eye, right? So, you want to be using pressure pot as like one of your big driving pieces of equipment to ensure you're getting consistent results from your mold. So I'm thinking right now, like, how big does my pressure pot have to be to fit like a retro console like the Xbox? Because you got the Xbox size, but then you need to add on extra height and width for the mold as well. That's a big pressure pot.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm also thinking about what happens if that pressure pot explodes, because that's a big pressure pot.
Yeah, you don't want to be there if that happens.
Exactly. So they're like literally little bombs. So, I would love to be honest, Joe, though, if I were to start doing some of the console stuff, I would probably just start with like buttons. Like a lot of the stuff that, like pretty much the only stuff we sell at the moment, like kind of our first stepping stone, is the like buttons, right? Cut and polish buttons. So I could totally see myself dabbling in like console controller buttons or controllers themselves as well. Controllers are very, very popular in terms of their housing and aftermarket parts, because they wear out. Like, we're handling them.
Oh Christ, do they? I mean, I've got my PlayStation 5 controller. I think I've got two, fortunately, but I think the right trigger on it has lost a little bit of its force. My Xbox Series X controller, it's got stick drift, and there's an issue with the right trigger. Bloody hell, how long have I had these? 3 months?
Yeah, stick drift is a huge issue for a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, we had it, as you're saying, we had Nintendo with stick drift, and I've known my mate Rich has had stick drift, my mate Phil has had stick drift. I was actually thinking about making a video about it this week, talking about, the shoddy manufacture of these things, because as much as I love the Xbox controller, and I really like the Xbox controller, it's not good enough that a controller, and let's be honest, I'm not a bloody hardcore user, not these days. I don't play for 10 hours at a time every day. For me to have an Xbox controller that's already got stick drift and a problem with the right trigger, and to have a problem with the right trigger on my PlayStation 5 controller and have stick drift on my Switch, which I only really play my Switch when I go on holiday, really. I don't play it much at home. It's not good enough, really, when you think about it. And when I buy stuff from some, guy on the internet who does it as a hobby, and it's more robust than a multi-billion-dollar company.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's interesting,
come on,
at the
really?
very least. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it's like, is there an issue in terms of like what's an acceptable failure rate in terms of how many controllers get the stick drift issue? Like, are they producing so many controllers that even the smallest percent ends up being a lot of controllers? It's interesting. Yeah, like, obviously there's a lot of refinement that needs to happen. I can't comment on it because I'm not really up to scratch, but I'd imagine because it's affecting so many different brands of control. Like, it seems to affect, I don't know if it actually affects PlayStation. It could, but I know I've heard about the Xbox and the Switch that Twitch definitely gets drift. But I'm wondering if there's an actual flaw with just kind of what the joystick hardware is that we use today. If there's like a flaw in the technology that they're trying to overcome, or if it is just some kind of like lazy oversight and they can't be buggered kind of refining the processes anymore.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know. But it is, I mean, it does go back to what you were saying about, when you do your stuff and you're trying to make it as good as you possibly can, and you want to have pride in your work. I think
absolutely,
to some extent with this, there is no pride involved. It's pile them high and sell them cheap sort of thing, although they're not selling them cheap because they're bloody expensive. But yeah, I've experienced stick drift on so many controllers now. It's ridiculous, and it shouldn't happen. Not to this degree. Yeah, not really. I mean, you see loads of people talking about stick drift on the Switch, and there's already people talking about problems with the PlayStation 5 controller. And like I say, I need to look into it a bit more. But I think I've got slight issues with the right hand trigger on my PlayStation controller, or one of them. I've got two. So yeah, I mean, again, we're going off on a tangent, but it does go to this whole thing of producing quality and wanting to make the best thing you can. And I've said this a load of times, when you deal with small guys, and it's not always the case, but often when you deal with small guys, they are extremely interested in making sure that you have a good experience with their products, because they're small. And a couple of people saying, don't buy from them, it's shit, and they could go out of business.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's like, just from my perspective as someone who's doing it, it's not even necessarily like worried about, like I said, it's that pride in your own work. Like, worried about what someone's going to think of it is almost like the secondary thought, because you're so swept up in just hitting your own personal 100% that, you don't even think about almost like the customer and what they're going to think, because it doesn't matter, because you've already freaking eyeballed every single piece of product that's gone out the door, and it won't go out the door unless you're 100% happy with it. Yeah. I mean, I've got heaps of like stuff that's never going to go out the door, just because, not that there's necessarily anything inherently wrong with it. I'm just a little bit OCD and a bit of a perfectionist, that if I'm not happy with it, why should other people be happy with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the whole reason you got into stuff like this is because you want to make something good and you want to make something nice. So why would you compromise on that?
Yeah, exactly.
You'd be completely undermining the whole reason for doing it, which goes back to what we were saying before about, wanting to maintain that reason. That's, you start a little business like this, you're not doing it necessarily because you want to make a lot of money. You're doing it because it's a passion project.
Yeah, definitely.
And
and like you said, like, you have to keep that passion alive. And I think, like, again, I think it's I think it's like, I don't want to say it's easy to do because there's a lot of mundane stuff when you transfer from a hobby to a business. But, again, like the reasons why you got into the business, if you built your business on those reasons, like I think quite often that's enough to sustain people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Right. Anyway, look, I think we're touching on the hour mark now, unless you've got anything else that you wanted to add specifically.
No, I can't believe it's been an hour, honestly. Like,
no, it's gone fast, hasn't it? It's gone really fast. I hope it goes fast for anyone listening.
Yeah,
well.
I just want to encourage people, like, if you're a millennial or you're a little bit younger or whatever, if you have any kind of interest in kind of the retro scene or at all, go straight to Instagram and just start searching like some of the retro handheld hashtag or Gameboy hashtags. Just start surfing some of the hashtags and you're going to unearth some freaking absolute gems of like posts and content. And you can do that for, home consoles and everything. Honestly, Instagram is fantastic in terms of how it like categorizes content and it all interconnects and it's very easy to find. So if you have any kind of interest whatsoever, I encourage everyone to go do that because I think at the moment the scene is still growing fast by the day, and it's very strange because I started a couple years ago and I felt like the new guy, but then you almost see like whole waves of new people coming into the scene contributing new stuff, and it's almost like seasonal stuff. Like people seem to come in seasons almost. I'm like, okay, so this guy came in with this group of people, and then a few months later you get the next group of people that come in. It seems to be a space that's growing fast and rapidly and doing a lot of exciting stuff. So I really think it's something for people to keep an eye on if they're interested in like, any kind of retro electronics or gaming. And just to wrap things up, like it's hard to say where it's all going to go, but I think the journey wherever we end up is going to be very exciting. And I think Joe actually touched on it earlier with the RetroPi builds. I actually think we might start seeing a lot of RetroPi or custom hardware completely replacing the original hardware, but kind of going into a lot of these original systems because as it currently stands, like the scene's capable of producing all of their own custom housings. I do a lot of that. And there's already a lot of hardware that's being produced and manufactured. So I think with the current economics of trying to buy a lot of this original hardware, I think I'm going to start seeing people get a lot more creative with a lot of the emulation and, alternate options. So I think that might interest you, Joe, more than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And we haven't even mentioned FPGA yet.
Absolutely.
That's growing massively as well. But maybe we should get my mate John on to talk about that, and we should have another video and talk about that at some point because that's a whole scene in itself, and that's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. And also, just a quick reminder to whoever made it this far is check out Joe's description box because if you can't be bothered searching the hashtags, I'll give Joe a bit of a hit list of people to check out.
Brilliant. Right. And I think that we're done.
Yeah.
So
well, thanks for
I'm
having
going to bugger off and give my voice a rest. And do check out the description box and do check out what Sully is doing because it's fantastic and the whole scene is extremely exciting. I'm excited about it, and I'm not even a Game Boy owner. So as Sully says, go and check out the description box and go down a rabbit hole. And in the meantime, we're going to bugger off. I think Sully's going to go and get some sleep, and as I say, I'm going to go and grab myself a cup of tea. Cheers.